to get started. So welcome everybody. I am Michelle Carter, Director of Educational Content and Programs at Shape America. And as you may know, Shape America recently launched a national task force to update the K-12 physical education standards. As the task force begins to tackle this important and tackle important and complex conversations regarding the current standards in the work ahead, they felt it would be extremely helpful to hear feedback from pre-K through 12 educators at the beginning on this revision process about whether and how the national standards play a role in your own practices and the approach to physical education. We're also going to do 2 rounds of public review and feedback. So there's going to be multiple processes multiple times throughout the process to gain feedback through that. So with that in mind, we've convened this national town hall specifically for pre-K through 12 teachers to hear directly from you all, the educators in the field. And so I'm joined today by our panelists. We have Amy, Darius, Joel, Lay, Sarah, Tilsa, and Tori, and they're going to introduce themselves a little bit later. But before we get into the discussion, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So what's different about this is that we're using Zoom meetings instead of a normal webinar. And so that's why you can see so many different faces. And so that means we're going to be able to see and hear each of you. But I would like everyone to be muted. And if you could turn off your cameras for now. So if you haven't, I'm going to give you an opportunity to turn off your cameras. There will be a dedicated portion of the town hall where the audience will be able to ask questions and engage with panelists and respond to speak to other attendees and provide comments and such. And at that time, we'll unmute. You'll be able to use the raise your hand function so that if you have a question or if you would like to speak, we'll be able to do that. We are recording this meeting, and so that's part of the reason why we're asking you to keep your cameras off, just kind of help with the recording purposes and things of that nature. As I mentioned earlier, I encourage each to use the chat function. I will be monitoring the chat as best as possible, and be sharing comments and the discussion continues. And like I said, there will be an opportunity for the audience to share thoughts, ask questions, and have them answered directly by panelists. So I'm going to take a moment. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience or in our attendees? And I have some of my Shape America peeps in the background if you see any questions that do come in. Or there's a raise your hand. Just 1 second. All right, I didn't see any question. So we got a question around timeline and will it include pre-K? And so we'll talk about some of those things. So our timeline is about a 2.5 year timeline to when we'll have completed standards, but it may be as we are going through this, if we need to add time to that, we will, but we're projecting about 2 to 2.5 years for completed work. And so, yes, we're including pre-K in the standards updates, but let's get into I'd like to start hearing from our panelists, and then we'll get into some of the details in terms of the specifics around the task force work and timelines and some of that information. So I'm going to start with Joel, if you'll introduce yourself. And each panelist is going to share about 2 to 3 minutes about how the national standards play a role in their day-to-day work, their thoughts about physical education and its direction. And so they'll each take some time to introduce themselves, and I'm going to officially hand it off to Joel.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joel Fry, and I'm a PE teacher at KIPP DC Discover Academy. It's a public charter school in Washington, DC, and I work with pre-K3, pre-K4, and kindergarten. And for me, as far as the standards go, I use them to kind of guide my planning in what I'm teaching to my kids. For me, as someone teaching the youngest students and receiving them at the beginning of their educational journeys, I feel it's important for me to create an environment where they're excited to learn. I think it's my responsibility to help my students create a foundation for living healthy lives, and I believe I have to do that. I have to teach them in a way that they're able to understand the what and why they're learning. I remember for me, PE was always my favorite class growing up because it was fun and I was excited to learn. Um, I was excited for what I would be learning day to day. And I think for me, that's what the standards have helped me to do. Um, I'm excited to hear that there's going to be some considerations for adjustments. Um, I guess I guess we'll get into more, but that's just kind of where I am and where I'm coming from. And I guess Michelle will come back later, right? I don't know if you want any more from.
Yeah, we can start there, and then I'll hand it off to Amy. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Amy Schulte. I am at Timberland High School in the Winslow School District inside of in Winslow, Missouri. But I teach 9 through 12. I am blessed to get to teach a lot of fun electives right now. So I get a lot of students after their freshman year, they get a choice to choose some additional courses to take in the physical education, category itself. And it's neat because I get to do the weight training and I get some personal fitness and some outdoor adventure or outdoor pursuits type classes. And to be able to introduce kids into so many different types of fitness that's out there for them has really been rewarding. And I really enjoy being able to help kids discover what they enjoy and what they're good at so that they like it. I don't want them to always, think negative about it. Sometimes I get them, in that high school, age, and they used to love PE and they used to love activity, and then there's somehow they lose that disconnect. And I really want to help them find that joy. And that's what's really important to me is find what you love and keep doing it and keep an open mind because you never know what you're going to like. And it's been really cool to see kids share with me over the years the stuff that they've really gotten into because of it. So makes it fun.
I'll hand it to Lay now.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lay Dunn. I am a health and physical education teacher in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I currently teach kindergarten through 5th grade at Thalia Elementary. And when I'm explaining what I teach to others, including fellow teachers and families and just the general public, I find that I often have to start with what the purpose of physical education is. I often have to explain that I'm not just there to teach sports skills or fun games, although I do include those. I'm an educator, not a coach, and that subtle difference is sometimes a sticking point for individuals. So the true goal of K through 12 physical education is to teach children how to monitor and adjust and enjoy the physical aspects of wellness. And by having and using the national standards for physical education, I feel we lend legitimacy to physical education programs at every school level. I think it also offers a structure for evaluation, and it creates this expectation of a quality learning environment for every student, regardless of whether they participate in organized sports programs. A physically literate student becomes a physically literate adult, and that person has autonomous control over their body and can make informed decisions on what they do with it from a momentary basis. Everything is how hard they should push in a run to something more in depth like safety considerations for riding their bike around the neighborhood. And so the scope of physical education is vast. Therefore, quality standards-based physical education gives students the basis for building lifelong physical literacy. I think I would like to see the standards expand to use the scientific connections that have been shown between physical literacy and academic outcomes, including in music, art, and social skills. I think the body of research is vast, and incorporating wording of that nature into the current standards. And maybe even perhaps an additional standard will help bring physical education to the forefront of school division planning and financing, especially for those divisions that have cut physical education programs in the past.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it to Sarah now.
Michelle, just to clarify, would you like us to just do our brief introductions, or do you want us to do our spiel?
You can, I'm going to come back, so you can do a brief introduction, but those who want to add more to what they added, they can. We'll come back. I'll come back around. So you can go with your 2 to 3 minutes now, and then I'll give Joel and Amy an opportunity to share any additional thoughts that they've had.
Okay, great. I'll do my whole thing then. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Gitchier-Hartman, and I teach high school health and physical education at Clayton High School, which is a public high school in St. Louis, Missouri. Prior to that, I had a lot of experience teaching middle school. And so I have like 3 suggestions, I guess, or revisions for the standards and grade level outcomes. So the first one is that I feel like looking through the lens of Dr. Scott Kretschmar's research about meaningful engagement in physical activity could be the foundation for our standards and our outcomes. There are common threads that connect our individual physical activity experiences, like social interaction, competition, fun, challenge, motor competence, and personally relevant learning. And while it could be argued that some of these things are addressed within the grade level outcomes, I do not believe that there's a huge emphasis on fun or empowerment or choice or reflection, or helping our students make meaning out of why physical activity and movement is enjoyable or meaningful to them. The GLOs don't send a message that PE is a fun place to be. The second thing is that I think our teachers would benefit from having a detailed list of diverse activities that are suggested but not prescribed or mandatory, that would help us address the GLOs. Activity choices to consider when planning are something that are frequently provided within some of the provincial curricular documents that are in Canada. And I think that teachers in the US would benefit from those greatly, especially if they were reflective of gains and skills from other countries and cultures. Our GLOs are very hand-centric activities that involve throwing and catching, and not all of our students need that. And then my third suggestion is that while the GLOs played a huge part in my teaching when I was a middle school teacher and gave me a very clear blueprint for designing high quality standards-based lessons for my students, now that I've transitioned to high school, the GLOs are way too vague. And it's incredibly challenging to plan lessons that align with the GLOs at the high school level. And when talking to other high school teachers who've been teaching high school for much longer than me, they have the same concerns. They're very difficult to unpack and connect to our students' learning experiences.
Thank you, Sarah. I am going to hand it to Tori.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me here. My name is Tori Pierre. I am a health and PE teacher at Jefferson Academy in Southwest DC. It is a public school. I teach middle school. I have taught high school in DC as well. And I have to agree with Sarah that the GLOs have definitely, in my transition to middle school, have been sufficient and effective in helping me create my lessons, but on the high school level, I never looked at them as a sufficient foundation on its own. So I do agree with that point. When it comes to the purpose of health and physical education, we all know physical literacy is the basis through physical activity. And if it's not fun physical activity, they will not learn. So discovery is something that has to be part of the practice and a part of our purpose, deliberate practice of skills, not only in health, but in PE. I have really transitioned to health, and I see that what I believe is missing is the connection with academic outcomes as well. and the sense that it is hard for teachers to transition and scaffold and differentiate for PE as you can in health, because we have so much research that correlates in the classroom setting that the language, again, is not being able to correlate for our physical educators. Also, what I would like to see is more so connection with social emotional learning, maybe a more positive outlook. I can, or I will demonstrate statements. If we're going to correlate this together with skills-based health, they have to come together and coincide with all the dimensions of wellness. And pretty much piggyback off of Sarah and Ms. Dunn, but great statements from both ladies. And I agree that more is needed in actual practice. And especially since COVID, we have so many resources available, but how do we translate that for PE? I'm still grappling with that myself, if I'm just throwing something out there.
Thank you, Tori. So I'm going to circle back to Joel, and would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that's been stated previously, especially Sarah's points on clarity. I think there could be a lot more clarity on all levels, just not just the high school or middle school. Because when you look at the standards, it's kind of you take it for what it is and then apply it to the best of your ability. And also what Tori said about the social emotional learning, especially someone is teaching 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. I think that's an important aspect of their learning. And I think PE class is a great space to address those needs. But considering the questions that we were provided prior to this, me personally, some of the things missing from the PE national standards, I think you could take some of the concepts from the health standards and incorporate those into the PE standards, like the goal setting and the decision making and the interpersonal communication. I think I don't think there's a clear division between physical education and health education where those things have to be separated. So I think that would be something to consider. And as far as something I feel that it's important to keep in the standards, I think just demonstrating competency is kind of like a baseline thing for all all standards. If a kid doesn't know it, then they're not ready. But for me, as far as what I've learned during the pandemic, is kind of what I just stated about the health standards. So as a ECE teacher, I don't really go in deep into health, but I kind of, in my own way, try to incorporate that because I feel it's important for my students to help their foundation. And I've been able to incorporate, a lot of health and PE virtually. I've had access to virtual tools that I wouldn't have in the classroom. So I've been able to leverage, programs that are online, and I can broadcast, virtually as I share my screen, and kids it's presented to kids in a way that they can receive it and understand it and then apply it moving forward. So like Tori was saying, like, how can we take the resources and information that we've gathered through virtual learning and then incorporate it or translate it back into the in-person environment. And lastly, I think everybody's kind of touched on this. And then from my own personal experience, I think there could be more, like for the overall state of physical education, I think there could be more emphasis and priority given towards physical education. For a long time now, it's felt like our discipline, our content area has been secondary to other classrooms and other content. But I would argue that the development and maintenance of healthy lifestyles is as important to anything else our students are learning, if not more important. That's my little soapbox. But thank you guys, and I'll pass it on to our next panelist.
Thanks, Joel. And I'm looking through the chat as people are talking, and one thing that I just saw recently was that about someone suggesting, can the PE and health ed national standards be combined and aligned? So the great thing that is that, Shape America Now, the National Health Education Standards, we are at the same time concurrently getting ready to start the process to revising the National Health Education Standards. And so we'll be putting out a call for task force members, and we'll also be hosting another town hall at the end of this month, similar to this format, to gather feedback and input. And so one thing that we have been talking about internally, and the standards task force has also been discussing, is how can those two groups work or collaborate together so that there's more synergy between the PE standards and the health standards. So to that point, and I think Joel, you touched on that too. So I'm gonna hand it back to Amy to share her thoughts, and then give the panelists another opportunity if they'd like to add anything, and then we'll open it up to our for broader discussion amongst our attendees.
All right. So I agree with all of them. I mean, they had some great points. And I do think, especially with the pandemic and COVID and all the fun, we're in virtual, we're in hybrid, we're back in person and going back and forth. I think the kids more than ever have really used what we've been, bringing home to them a lot about their mental and emotional health. And I've been using a lot of that in my lessons with physical education. I'm really doing a lot with them, as far as making connections with how the physical activity is helping them, succeed academically in the classroom, whether it is virtually or not. I had a lot of students, we did things where they were getting up and making sure they were being active before they had to sit in front of a screen for an extended period of time. And then they would write reflections about how it made them feel, or we would share in a group session whenever we were all together, just so that they weren't having to stay on the computer, hopefully just a little bit longer. But I've had a lot of students make sure that during their day, they're making sure that they're adding, PE electives in so that they can be active throughout the day, because they're really seeing the value in it and see how much it enhances their mood and makes them feel better. Some of my students that are struggling with ADHD or, sitting in a classroom all day, they're learning to, advocate for themselves and say, hey, I need to add an activity class in here to where I can be up and moving, and, it's going to help me later on. So we're really trying to help them make those connections. And I think that that's huge, because it's not only what they're going to need now, but what they're going to need later on. And I think that's my biggest thing, is their why, helping them understand why we're doing these things in class. And one of my huge focuses is fun. I want it to be fun. I don't want to sit there and lecture them for an extended period of time. Obviously, I want them up and moving, but how are they learning this while they're moving has been huge. The self-care and mindfulness has been a large thing that I'm making sure that I'm getting in there for them. And I think, what's nice about our standards is they are open and broad enough to where we can, be free with a lot of that. But like we were talking about earlier too, I think I almost need a little bit more structure sometimes too, to help guide me through the planning process, because there's so much that you can add in, and I almost need help narrowing it down a little bit. But it's been wonderful to help me, guide me for the why we're doing different activities, and making sure that I can come back to that and relate them whenever I'm planning. But I almost do need a little bit more in there, like they were talking about with the health. I think, correlating it with health a lot would help too.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry, I was responding to something in the chat. So before we kind of switch gears a little bit, Sarah, Tori, Joel, Lay, is there anything else that you'd like to add or share? Any additional thoughts that you've heard that you'd like to respond from any of the other panelists?
I would like to add from the chat, a fear of them being, I know you said that they would not, but I feel like in this virtual setting, I kind of honed more in on health and used health to teach my physical education standards. So talking about the dimensions of health, talk about physical health, spiritual health, and knowing that yoga is part of spiritual health, talking about emotional health and what do we do to combat or stress, which is physical activity. So trying to word them, and as Ms. Dunn said earlier, using our academic language to create that what physical literacy really looks like. What does it sound like? Not also what we can see, demonstrate, but if they are literate, how are they communicating that literacy to us in their day-to-day life? So I think for me, I don't think they should be a hybrid. Now this is said health and PE, but the academic language should complement each other.
And actually, Tori kind of touched on something that I was going to say as well, because in Virginia, we have the benefit of, we are licensed in health and physical education. So I teach all of the students in my school every single day, health and physical education. And while not all schools have that aspect, it does give me the ability, not all states, but it does give me the ability to align what we're doing. So in the atmosphere of COVID right now, where we have to have low respiratory activities, we can put that in there, and understanding, even though we're talking about the physical education standards, understanding the health standards is necessary in order to connect the two, because they are all part of wellness, and we cannot function as a separate entity. So even though they are not going to be combined standards, it doesn't mean that we can just say, I only teach health and physical education, and I cannot focus on those, because they are connected.
Not to speak on behalf of the group, but just based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like we somewhat believe in like a holistic approach to physical education, and knowing that like not one size fits all, and that, the students that Joel teaches are completely different than mine, not just the age, but the location and other parameters we maybe have in place. And the standards and GLOs right now are written in a more prescriptive way, especially when you look at the things that are saying like can perform something 3 out of 5 times. I think that I would appreciate it if the GLOs were a lot more holistic, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then it was up to me as the teacher to determine then how I would assess that thing, and how I would really have my students demonstrate it, or what it would look like on a rubric, especially if I only see my students, once a week or once every 10 days or every single day, right? It's going to look completely different. And yes, Kim in the chat, I think that goes with the equity piece. I think it just makes it so much better for everyone.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. So, okay, I am going to switch gears just a little bit, and I am going to share my screen. First, I want us to, we're going to acknowledge who our current National K-12 Physical Education Standards Task Force, those individuals who are on that task force to help revise the current standards. This isn't the final task force list. There are some changes that are currently being made, and that final list will be made public later, but this is who is currently on the task force as is. And then Carly put in the chat how we came to that task force decisions there. So what I'm also going to do next is we're going to get ready to open up to the rest of the larger audience. And there's been some great discussion in the chat around this. And some of our task force members are listening, and if they're not on currently, they will listen to this recording and then as it come together and that sort of thing. So as we're get ready to open up to larger group, these are just some questions to think about. And this is kind of where the panelists were coming from in some of the questions, and maybe some of the things that as audience members you would like to respond to, or anything that you've heard any of our panelists respond to. If you do have comments, or you would like to share or make a comment, respond, share your thoughts, we ask that you, you know how Zoom is, and then when you're sharing your screen, all the little functionality disappears. So if you could raise your hand using the raise your hand function, and we're asking that just because we're recording, and this will be viewed and shared later, is that as you're coming in, you're off camera, you're muted. When you do raise your hand, I'll call on you, you can share your video, and then we'll unmute you so that you can share as well. into the chat. So I'm going to share. All right, is there anybody that would like to, from our larger audience, to share? I saw some thoughts around grade level outcomes in the chat.
Michelle?
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm the old codger in the group, but
Is that
also
Tom?
have the, yes, it is.
If
Here
you want to share your, there you go.
there.
Thanks for
Sure,
chiming in.
exactly. And first of all, I'm so delighted to have Amy and Sarah GH on here. Very proud of what they have done and what they continue to do and the thoughts that help them be the leaders that they are. What do you feel is the purpose, the goal of the program? Start with backward design and think of what does the product of our program look like? When a person graduates from high school, are they career ready so that they can go in for employment, further education, career choices, and have the physical skills, the health skills that are predominant, including mental and emotional social well-being. These to me are critical to be looking at the product of the program when they graduate from high school. Will they be able to have a value system that hits the highest level of the affective domain, characterization? Characterization means that what you do every day defines your values. When we graduate people who no longer want to be physically active, that's a failure on our part because we failed to personalize, we failed to provide choice, and we have not given them the outlook for what the program could be. So to me, the first thing that needs to be considered is what are the elements that go into creating that product that will be active and healthy. I like Amy's hoodie. I mentioned that, recognizing our association, but we've had a tagline, let Mo shape your future, active and healthy for a lifetime of success. We have to create successful people. And the last comment that I will make, because you know what it's like with me, Michelle, you need to shut me off at times. But I attended a webinar on Monday with our St. Louis Area Business Wellness Coalition. The lead speaker, Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania, provided one of the top 5 professional presentations I've ever heard in my life. And it was all about how important it is to be optimistic, to have sound mental health, and that the 3 main indicators of long life. One is physical activity. Exercise is one of the 3 indicators, and having a positive outlook on life is the other. So these are 2 areas that we impact greatly. So if that makes sense, I've shared a lot of information with Brad about the processes that we followed and the documents that we followed, but that's enough for now.
Thank you, Tom. So I don't see any hands that are joining. So if there's more comments or even just starting a new thought or a new thread, a stream of thinking, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll be glad to hear it. I'm looking in the chat and I do see someone had asked, is this planned to be an update, minor revisions throughout, or a full revision structure and all? So Carly kind of responded, but I just wanted to share out loud. That's where the task force is determining right now, looking at research, looking at, they want to hear from, we've heard from a group of Pete Pete faculty and listen to that information and their thoughts. And then we thought we wanted to do it with K-12 educators, which brought us to this town hall. So we're really determining, we want to hear what teachers have to say in regards to that. When I say we, I'm speaking on behalf of the task force who is doing that work. So I'm seeing things around grade level outcomes and minutes per PE. So all right, so someone asked, while I love individual lifetime sports activities at high school, has there been a discussion around broadening to lifetime team activities? We haven't gotten that deep into that part as a task force. Yes, we're really in the early stages and looking at some of these thoughts here. What is the purpose of physical education? Thinking ahead to what students need and some of the things, looking at that research in terms of physical literacy, talking about physical literacy as a term versus a concept, some around that. So in the chat, can you see a raise your hand feature? Are people wanting to speak, but they just don't see the opportunity to raise their hand? I don't want to.
Michelle, just FYI, if they're on
Go
their
ahead.
phone, sometimes it's harder to find it.
Okay, so if you're on your phone, if you would like to share anything in the chat and you can't see the raise your hand feature, please say so in the chat. Lay, Amy, Tori, Sarah, and Joel, if you're seeing comments in the chat and you'd like to respond. Someone says the raise hand is under the reactions button for those who may be still looking. Feel free to come off mute and share your thoughts as well. I know the task force is super interested in hearing what you all have to say as educators, and this is a really great time to share things publicly. There's no right or wrong when you're sharing. You're just sharing. We want to hear different perspectives. Okay, Ryan Eldridge raised their hand. Ryan, come on down.
So I appreciate you guys doing this. And basically, one of the biggest things I want to, just to answer your first question on here, the purpose and goal of physical education is essentially to have lifelong learners and lifelong physically active participants and health, obviously overall health as well. So in that regard, one of the things that I have a concern with, I know a lot of people in the chat have talked about holistic. I just have a small concern in that end, because if we start to if we start to make it more general, my fear is from my positions, I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator, I've been at the state level, and have been at the building level as a PE and health coordinator. And one of the things I see from that administrative end is when you make things more holistic, they see more cuts and those types of factors. So you sometimes do need tangible outcomes delivered inside the standards. And the last thing, and I apologize, of course, I don't know if my doorbell's going off there, but the last thing I see is that one of the ways to maybe make them continue to be tangible but not have those 3 of 5 outcomes is to focus on, for instance, in Ohio, when we updated our standards to reflect the national, one of the things we looked at focus was what specific. So in throwing, students are stepping with opposition by X grade level, and then students are giving a mature arm pattern by first grade, and then second, and so forth there. So it's just looking at those types of factors to really make sure that we're focusing inside here, that we're not losing, we're not setting ourselves up for failure in the long run.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. Someone just wrote in the chat, Nate says, can we get beyond but include movement and PA for PE. In other words, does it have to be about future health and physical activity? Can it be for other things as well? Can it be about enhancing our embodied capabilities through physical activities? Activities being a very broad term that could include self-massage and isn't limited to the privileging of MVPA. I thought that was an interesting thought. If anybody wants to respond or has a similar thought, I'm just reading things that come across too. Someone agrees, I assume, with what Ryan said, that from the district level perspective and working in a state where someone doesn't need a degree in teaching to teach, the specificity helps provide focus and show the depth of our content.
Hi, Michelle, if I could speak, I was just
Sure.
kind of thinking about one of the comments and also what Ryan mentioned. So I have to say, you know, from an administration standpoint, that we need to be specific enough that these students can be graded. And, you know, we don't want to say that we're like, oh, grades aren't important. But the fact of the matter is that the students are there to learn something. And if we don't have evidence that they've learned it or that they've mastered it, then we don't have evidence that our purpose there is necessary. And so when you get things that are a little bit more generic, and so obviously holistic, when we say you know, holistic, we want to have those different aspects. But if we make the wording too general and we remove so many of the grade level outcomes that it's hard to say, then we start saying, well, they don't really need the health and PE teacher or physical education teacher to do that. They could just do that in the classroom. Or they don't really need the physical education teacher to do that. They get that socialization or that movement from recess time, or they get it from walk and talk time. And so if we want to continue to build our status, for lack of a better word, as an important function in the school, the most important, I think somebody typed that in the chat earlier, we are the most important teacher in the school. So if we want to continue to build that level, not that we should just be pushing things in the kids' faces, but we need to be able to show evidence that what we're doing is prescribed and specific and is helping them in a specific way, with some leeway to help our students as we see necessary, you know, and for our students, for our learning environment, for the amount of time that we're given with them.
Thank you, Lay. I'm going to hand it to Kara to unmute, and she wants to come on video.
It's not letting me come on video, but that's okay. Oh, here we go. All right. Well, happy May the 4th, everybody. May the 4th be with you all. I wanted to really come in. I'm all about primary source documents. So what I would really love is that whatever transpires is grounded in research and data, because that is what our stakeholders, that's evidence. We have quantitative and qualitative data around what our students can do, what challenges they're being faced with, how much of them are engaging in the practices we want them to engage in for a lifetime through the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey produced by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Additionally, like when talking about holistic model, if we ground it more so in the CDC whole child, whole school, whole community, I always mess that acronym up, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. You know, like if we ground it in framing, this is where we belong, and this is how PE and, you know, contributes to the greater whole picture, and how we collaborate with counselors and school psychologists and community resources. And this is how our standards serve, I think would be critical. So just really grounding it into the instructional models too. So we have that quantitative scientific data, those scientific folks that are collecting data about what our students are, where they are, and where they need to go as a nation. And then also doing an overlap of what are our pedagogical processes, programs, and instructional models that are meeting the needs. So like tactical games, and like bringing that down, and knowing that Harvard research says students and adults are more likely to engage in individual pursuits for a lifetime over team sports, right? So how do we empower folks to be able to access these activities for a lifetime if we only focus on one type of activity. So just to summarize, grounding in research that goes from the quantitative data of what students are showing us and what stakeholders are showing us that they can do or they're unable to do because of barriers in their community, home, or socioeconomics and others, and then linking that to instructional models and practices. That's been said around culturally responsive instruction and teaching, equity, diversity instruction, and giving permission to not have a one size fits all, but to have high expectations for all. So thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Tori has her hand or had her hand raised if you still want to speak.
Well, Kara just kind of eloquently said everything I wanted to reiterate. Really what Tom was saying from backwards design, if we're going to have that competent person leaving to be an adult, yes, we have to look at the lifetime standards. If you have students with ACEs, are you using your resources? For example, I do not teach certain lessons without my clinical psychologist there or a social worker, because I want the students to, again, access credible health information. That's also the resources in their community. So just looking at the way you make relevancy, COVID has helped relevancy come to the forefront that we are the best class and the class you need for the rest of your life. But nonetheless, truly utilizing the resources, the data, to not have anyone second guess what we do in our rooms or in our gyms.
Thank you. So what I'm seeing in the chat too, it sounds like there needs to be a balance where I feel like I've seen a couple people say in the chat, plus Sarah kind of mentioned too, GLOs can't be too prescriptive. They need to provide some flexibility. It's kind of what I'm seeing, but I'm going to read this comment too, another one that I think it's possible to have broad overarching standards alongside a comprehensive resource that teachers can use to meet their own unique contextual needs. Teachers need to have the freedom to be able to meet the overarching standards in ways that are relevant to their context. Detailed standards sort of work against that. Let's open the wording of the standards and provide some detailed resources that allow for flexible approaches to meeting those standards. Now there's lots of chatter going on into the chat. So if anybody who's typing wants to talk, feel free. So someone else, Sarah, do you want to, I saw you had typed something in response to GLOs. Do you want to kind of just speak to that? About it not being curriculum?
Oh, yeah. And several people have said this. So I was just kind of reiterating something, is that unfortunately, some people use the standards and the GLOs as if that's the curriculum, but it's not. Like, those are the guidelines that our curriculum should be aligned to, and we can pull bits and pieces, and some GLOs might work for your situation and other ones don't. Like, for example, I don't need any aquatics ones because I don't have a pool that I use, like, just to give you an example, right? And yeah, so I think, but many of us are in situations where we don't have a curricular framework, or it's outdated and things like that. So I like what Nate was saying above in the chat, where he, I think it was Nate Babcock, said, it'd be nice if we had like these like standards and GLOs and then resources that teachers can use to make them relevant for their situation that they're in, relevant for their students. So Nate, I'd love to hear from you. I don't know, I'd just like to hear from more people, because, like, this is your chance. And so, like, I would hate for you in 2 years when this stuff comes out to be like, man, I wish Shape America had given me the opportunity. Like, it's right now. So, like, here's your chance to unmute, everybody.
Yes, and we're going to save the chat, but it's a great chance to actually talk. And I'm sorry if someone was talking because I didn't see them.
No worries. It's me. It's Nate. So I think, just to cut to the chase here and to just go full on heretic, I think our biggest problem really is that we begin with this idea that people must be a certain way. Like, you need to be healthy, you need to be fit, you need to move for a lifetime. Until we clean up that, I think we're always going to be stuck, because you can't decide that for people. That's not our responsibility. What we can do is we can empower people, and we can engage with our content, but the meaning of our content is personal. And so, as I said earlier, we have this personal, social, and ecological well-being. We can never go for one or the other. It has to be all three at the same time. So for me, if we're going to talk about health, I think we typically have a very superficial notion of health, and especially our subject, right? Like we're sometimes health and physical education, but you never see like health and math, health and language arts. But why isn't health attached to every single subject? The reason why health is attached to our subject is because we typically see health as being a really superficial thing that you can almost, size up by looking at somebody's body, right? And there's that word shape there. You can almost see by looking at their shape. And so what we do, I think in PE, what we've tended to do throughout the years is we have a shape in mind, and then we shape students into the shape. And the shape is you're a healthy, lifelong mover. And so I'm going to get you to be that way. I'll design the entire curriculum to get you that way. And so then what we do is we narrow the possible outcomes into, into narrow possible outcomes. And so we leave a lot of students behind. So I think the transition needs to be into a different idea of health. Health for me is essentially a capacity to engage, right? It's a capacity to engage with self, others, and the whole. And so our content through these physical embodied practices, they enhance our ability to engage. It shouldn't be, like I've said this before, our subject is the body subject. That's what the physical means. We're not physical activity education. We're not movement education. If we are, then let's just call ourselves that. Quit be like, what I'm saying? Like there's this incoherence there. We're the body subject. That's what physical means. It means the body. But of course, we have these different dimensions of the body, the lived body, right? And the body is an object in a sense too. Now, my major point here is we're the body subject, not the be this kind of body subject. This has been our crime forever. Be this kind of body, move like this, be like this, perform like this, eat like this, look like this. We will never work like that, or at least we won't work as well as we could. I think we all know that our subject could be the best subject, the best class on campus, and it should be on every single campus. But I do struggle hearing PE teachers saying we're the most important, we are the best. We are not. We typically do not behave that way. We squander our potential constantly, and it's because we're trapped in this dream of fixing people and making them a certain way. We should not have that right to do that. We can take our subject and we can mix it with the students we have in our unique contexts, and the stuff we do will transform them on their own terms. And then when it comes to assessment, we then partner with them. So rather than thinking that students need to be at a certain place, I need to get you here. No, you don't. Rather than it being a destination, like a journey to a destination, it's an adventure, and we work together. And our job is to go through meaning, like Megan just said, they're student-centered, meaningful, relevant. If what we do, if we provide an enriched context, a student-centered, but also like world-centered, community-centered, because we have to have the person and the whole at the same time. But if it's meaningful and it's relevant, then they will transform on their own terms. And it's not just for the field or the gym or whatever, it's for life, it's for everywhere. Because in a sense, a handstand and juggling you shouldn't do it in PE so you could get good at handstands and juggling. You do it because you learn about yourself. It's a different perspective on the world. It's a different type of knowledge. It's another way into living. It's transformational. But we squander the potential of handstands and juggling because we start with the 5 critical elements and it has to be this way, and I'm going to grade you on it. And if you don't do it this way, oh well. So sorry to go full heretic there,
That's
but
okay.
I think
for that.
We're with the dream.
Yes, we have one of our additional panelists that just joined us, Tilsa Gonzalez. So Tilsa, if you don't mind introducing yourself, just telling us where you're located, where your role, and then we're going to give you, we've been having a lot of great discussions, so we'll let you just hop in and kind of get in on that, and then we'll let people continue to respond. There's lots in the chat. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. And I do apologize for being tardy. So I'm Tilsa Gonzalez. I am the supervisor for health and physical education for the City School District of New Rochelle, and that's in New York.
So we've just been asking, we had our panelists start with, what are your thoughts of, what do you feel the purpose or the goal of K-12 physical education is from your perspective and what you do on the day-to-day?
Sure. So I heard a lot of what Nate was talking about. And I know that there's one of the things I'm just picking up on that because it goes to the goals. So, there's always this big dilemma. Do you test children, and how do you test them? And what's the philosophy of testing? And if something is important, to what standard do you hold people? And so for me, the purpose and the goal of K-12 physical education is very much educating people on the self. I think that it's incredibly important for us also to make meaning of it. And when you make meaning of it, why do we have it? The truth of the matter is our body is the only house that we have to live in. So if we don't take care of it, then eventually it won't be there for us. And if you think about, the person who is immobile, and not because of reasons such as being born that way, but they're immobile because they deteriorated over time, because they chose to eat a certain way, they chose to live a certain lifestyle, then I think that has a big impact on just happiness, self-satisfaction. And let's face it, the images that society gives us is very much this kind of one package. But what's happening on the inside, slowly, if we're not aware of, then eventually it steals from us. And so when I think of K-12 education, we're teaching children to be aware of what's happening on the inside, so that what you can do on the outside is basically limitless. When you think of the idea of perseverance and what your body can do, what the human body can do, the potential that it gives you. I mean, take the idea of walking. A person who, is unable to walk due to mobility issues, you can't take that for granted. So a person who is able to walk, to what extent are you getting up during the day and walking and making sure that your posture is what it should be? To what extent are you making sure that when you're sitting at a desk, your ability to pay attention, to self-regulate, all of those things are interlinked. The ability to interact and socialize, young children being a part of a team or a team-like atmosphere. So the question is, does that include competition, or do you take competition out of it? Well, I think that each one of those things are things that you do need to teach children. And there is a physical aspect, because I always say that when you're sitting in a math class, no one can see whether or not you have the problem correctly. But if you can't throw a ball straight to your partner, everyone can see that. Is that a bad thing? No, of course not. Does that take away from a child's ability to get better? No, it doesn't. But does it take away from their psyche and, oh my goodness, I made a mistake, I don't want people to see, or oh, I tried, or oh, that person made a comment to me? So all of those things are encompassed for me in K-12 education. What we teach the children, how we teach the children, what we choose to test, when we choose to test it, and the purpose of testing it. I mean, I don't think that you should just test for the sake of testing, but if you're going to use that information to examine your program, if you're going to use that information to help staff reflect on what could be better and what changes can be made, then yes, I do think that testing is important. So the purpose of K-12 education and physical education is to create a holistic approach for children to be able to enter the world and do that in such a way that they can live a stronger, healthier life, and essentially, have choices. When your health deteriorates, choices are taken away. So it's a full promotion of wellness.
Thank you, Tilsa. I'm shifting through the chat. Is there anybody that would like to respond to Tilsa or comment on some of the things in the chat, add some of the thoughts? I saw one person wrote that we should rebrand health and physical education to include more social and emotional elements. I saw someone suggest revising the GLOs tied to fitness assessment, or drastically removing them or drastically revising them. I'm just kind of scrolling through. So I'm again seeing a lot of people think that there should be more flexibility, and they feel, I know we've talked about how the GLOs aren't supposed to be prescriptive or tell you how, but it seems that people have been interpreting them that way potentially and feel limited is what I'm gathering. So if nobody agrees with that, or if I'm not, okay, I see some people. George Centeo, you raise your hand, and then we'll go Daniel Hill.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. So I guess just to build off of what Nate Babcock was sharing there, what I heard from him was it sort of doesn't have to look the same for everybody. And sometimes we paint this idealistic picture of what it should be. And I'm just reflecting back. I'm not in this capacity now. I serve more as a state leader, but I reflect back to when I was in the classroom at the high school level in our program, and I'm sure it's common in others around the country. The goal is somehow ends up being promoting active, healthy lifestyles. That's like the end goal. And when Nate was talking, what I was thinking about was when I used to talk to my students at that level, it was, why do we do what we do? It's, you know, when you go off to work and you get out of here and you go out into the world, it may be that you stop by the gym on the way to work or on the way home to work. And are you comfortable? Do you know how to operate and take care of yourself there? You know, are you somebody who's going to participate in recreation leagues, or when you're off at college playing ultimate frisbee on a campus and so forth? So I think just having that, there's a lot of different ways to get there. But if the end goal is we want to prepare you and give you a variety of experiences so that when you get out in the world, you're equipped to do whatever works for you. You might be, I like to run, I like to bike, I like to whatever. I like to work out at home and do at-home workouts. Have you had experiences and a sort of a taste of what that's like? Have you journaled that? Do you know what that feels like? And something that resonated from the national conference with the keynote, Dan Lieberman, the Harvard professor, how he shared, we now live in a world where people must choose to be active. I think it's making people in general, but our students understand that part of why we do what we do is the world we live in today, it's work. We have to choose to be active. How do you want to choose to be active? There's a lot of different ways to do it. It may be traditional sports, it may be, you know, recreation, it may be whatever, but that's got to be baked in. And the last point to one of the questions was on physical literacy. And in one of the coffee talks or whatever, I tried to make the connection of physical literacy with actual literacy, and having young children of my own. I see the repetition and the sight words and the A constant and E and the drilling and the practice. And I feel we can't leave out, if we want kids to be competent movers and to be able to participate in these different activities, we can't neglect the foundation and the skills and the practice that they need, especially at the elementary. So just some things to be mindful of, some reflections.
Thank you. Daniel Hill, you're up.
Hey, Chip America. Cheers for Kentucky. So I was one of the put in the chat about aligning the health standards and PE standards. I'm in a state that only requires a 0.5 PE credit K through 12. So it really ultimately falls to the PE teacher at the elementary and at the building level in the middle school to even provide PE, much less health. At the elementary level, there's just not a person to do that. Ultimately, on paper, it falls to the homeroom teacher to do it. They have enough on their plate, they can't do it. So my question is, how can these new revisions of the both PE and the health standards align together to fit the problem of time? There isn't enough time to do one, much less two, but with the only one person doing the two. And my last point is PE is the how, but the health is the why. That's why I think they really should be aligned intentionally. And I know you're going to do it, but they really have to be aligned intentionally.
Thank you. And yes, we're really excited for that opportunity because this is the first time that that's been able to really happen. With us doing this concurrently, we've talked to individuals, and that definitely is something that we have in mind. How can they be intentionally aligned? like I said, the word synergy, create more synergy, because realistically, the PE teacher is the health teacher a lot of the times. Okay, Lauren, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Laux, you're up.
That's okay, it's Laux, yes, thank you. I've been to several different states, so just bringing some of that experience to this too. The state that I'm teaching now, which is Oklahoma, it's definitely further behind than other states that I've taught in terms of, to me, I feel like I'm consistently defending what we do again, where I kind of felt like I came from a place where that was respected a lot more. But I also, while I agree that our purpose needs to tie to physical literacy, I also think it's so important that our standards reflect all the learning domains. Because the life skills that we learn in physical education, I think, are invaluable. And sometimes they're not being taught in other places in the school, whether that be sportsmanship or, how to handle failure, for example, which happens a lot in our field. I also think that with the pandemic, at least, again, just speaking from things I've seen in my state, and there are some great teachers, so please know that we have great teachers in Oklahoma as well. But I also think the pandemic showed us too that every lesson we have needs to be purposeful, because I think it's really easy, or it was really easy with the pandemic, to just throw a video together and post it for students to do. But again, the why, it comes back to the why, right? So what's the purpose? Why is it that we're asking them to do this? And I think that all of that has to tie back to, all those learning domains being represented and our credibility being there. The last thing I want to say is, so many people have pointed this out in the chat, but it's, I think, important to mention that the standards are not the curriculum, but the standards are what guide the curriculum. And so to be put into a way that we know we can reach those goals in our own ways, I think is really well said in the chat. And I just think it's worth reiterating as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, great chat, great things being discussed. I'm going to hand it to Kim Ballard.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad y'all are having this conversation. It's so worth it. And thanks for doing it in this forum. Being an old fogey, I was on the NASB board back in the day, and there'll be some people on here that'll remember some of this stuff. It used to, we used to have the saying of NASB sets the standard. And I remember having these conversations about what our standards should be. And we had some conversations about changing them back then. And everybody was against it because they were saying, no, we know that you can't teach all these standards in, 2 or 3 days, but we're setting the standard. We're saying it should be. And so I just think that, that hasn't worked. Yes, we set that standard. This is what we should probably be doing, but that's not our main goal, is just to teach 5 days a week. That's an outcome that we hope that we get. That's a best practice. That's not our curricula, or our standard as far as, what we have to be teaching. So I think it's really cool that you guys are going to look at that and refocus it, that we set the standard, but what are we setting the standard on, and how are we setting the standard now with what kids should know and be able to do.
Okay, I see lots of good conversations going in the chat. Tilsa, Amy, Joel, Sarah, do you want to add anything? I see someone who put here, we need to make sure national frameworks and guidelines are not decreased to support a lack of implementation time. We need to continue to advocate for quality time in health and PE as separate content areas.
Yeah, I'm glad you read that out loud, because I have to tell you, I was, so I think that I do want to be very careful. In New York State, the graduation requirement is that students do need to take PE every semester they're in school for high school, and 1 semester of health in high school and 1 semester of health in middle school. And I do want to caution kind of putting those 2 things together, because they are not the same thing. And the more time that is given to each of those areas, I think that would be beneficial. So I do want to be careful. There is overlap, but they are very, very different, and they're very distinct. And I think that it is important to focus on where they are different. In our health classes, the teachers have a tremendous amount of content to cover, which they can barely cover in a half credit class. And what happens in PE, I think it was Nate who made the comment that the teachers have that opportunity. What are they doing with that opportunity? So I think it's very much what is being done with that opportunity. And in New York State, it is also a requirement at the elementary level that the common branch or the teacher that the students are with, their homeroom teacher, is the teacher that's responsible for teaching content. And then the state delineates, well, what are those topics? And it's not something that has to be seen as an add-on. It's something that should be embedded in the culture. It should be embedded in all types of lessons. I mean, if you want to teach a lesson in nutrition, if you want to teach a lesson on habits, on self-expression or self-esteem, have the teacher bring it up as a topic during her reading lesson or during her math lesson. These are things that I think, instead of feeling like we need to recede back, we should be pushing forward and take more of an approach where it should be integrated into everything. Because again, a healthy person is a happy person. A healthy person and a mobile person that is able to run, jump, skip, and do all of these things that we're talking about for self-expression is a child that is going to be able to function at a different level. I mean, scientifically, there's science to prove what it is that we're getting at. And so I don't think, and I don't believe we should be shrinking back. I think we should aim at wanting to collaborate and integrate more of what we're doing with monthly themes, with, going to the principal and saying like, hey, this should be part of the culture.
All right, these are, I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the chat and going through it. Nate, I'll give you another minute since you had some air time. So come on.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. We'll just want to get everybody a chance.
Yep. No, totally understand. Thank you. Let me go back to my notes here. I just wanted to say, we just have to be careful to say things like, we've got to teach people how to eat. Like, they need to eat this way. These are the ways that they need to be. What we could do is we could explore ways of being. Like, we could say, what if we play this way? What if we play this way? What if we play this way? What happens here? What happens here? What happens here? What do you think about that? How does that make you feel? How does that affect others? Okay, what if you eat like this? How does it feel? What does it look like? How does it affect the environment? How does it affect the workers? What sort of companies are involved here? What are their influences? So rather than saying, look at my plate here, you eat like this, then you will be healthy, that really misses the whole social and ecological well-being portion of it. And it's really up for people to decide what they want to do and how they should live. But it's definitely our responsibility to inform them and to quote unquote educate them so that we can practice looking at things from multiple perspectives and then decide together and then examine the effects. And that spills out into the real world. That to me is health, rather than saying, you need to eat this way and be this way to be healthy. That's all. Those are like our values imposed on people, rather than saying, let's decide together what values work for us and what values work for you and me, and how we can, operate together.
Thanks, Nate. I'm going to read another comment until, if there's anybody else that wants to respond. Panelists, you jump in at any time as well too. Anybody raise your hand.
So can I
go ahead?
Only because so to Nate's comment, I hear what you're saying, but there is something to be said for putting certain things in our body. And I'm not sure if I'm understanding you correctly when you say things like, you said, oh, here is a way and we don't want to impose. Certain things are scientific. And I think that we do need to be factual with things that are factual. And then, yes, in response to being culturally sensitive to someone saying, well, these are the foods that I enjoy in my culture, and not trying to kind of, you use the word impose. I think that, yes, and we also need to be careful, because in one aspect, that sounds great, but the reality is that teachers only have a certain amount of time with children. They have a certain amount of time to plan, and they have a certain amount of time to follow through. And let's face it, there are very, very, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I doubt that there's a lot of PLCs sitting down and studying how their phys ed classes are going. And so when you think about that, the facts are the facts. If you are consuming certain things, it will have an impact on someone's body. And if included in eating a certain way, then a person is sedentary, it's scientific what's going to happen to the body, unless you have predisposed cursors and other genetic things that are going to counteract that. I think that we have to present things in a factual way, and then yes, allow people to decide. But when you think about America overall, we have an obesity epidemic. All of the literature out there is saying that we have an obesity epidemic. So this is a matter of importance. There's connections being made here. So while we're doing this as a profession and we want to lead people down the path, I think that there also has to be a call to action, a sense of urgency with the facts as to no, scare tactics don't work. But I think when people understand, and I was looking in the chat, you brought up the why. The why is embedded in the idea that it can change a person's lifestyle and their choices down the line if they don't have the proper facts.
All right. Can I follow up with what Tilsa was saying?
Absolutely.
When you address, imposing our why on students, it makes me think of my position and coming from the lens of an ECE teacher. When I'm getting kids at 3, 4, 5 years old, we're teaching them to think for themselves and to self-regulate. So they might not have the ability to understand their own why yet. We're teaching them, the skills to be able to think for themselves. And you want to what's the word? When you talk about the I'm sorry, I have a brain freeze. The societal and the cultural relevance. When you consider the cultural relevance and where the population of students that you're teaching, you have to factor in all of that. So for me, as an early childhood elementary teacher, when I discuss the why, it's not me trying to impose why I do something. I'm giving them my why, but hopefully it helps them to understand the decisions that I'm making so that they can formulate their own opinions and move forward from there. And we're trying to teach them the skills to do that on their own.
Thank you, Joel. But to some of the points about cultural context, and I've seen in the chat too, when you're thinking even that earlier, they're going to get a lot of their why from what's important to their family or important to their culture and those sorts of things. So I think, I'm glad to see some of these conversations, just a personal glad to see some of these things. Amy, did you want to add anything? You came off of mute.
I did.
Okay.
I did. I think that, as we go through this, obviously it's how you have to go about it at the kindergarten level through the high school level is going to be different because they're just going to understand it differently anyway. And I know at least at the high school level, I think it is important for them to know, they do need to know the facts, but then how can they relate that to themselves in the best way? What is going to make them their healthiest version that they want? And as long as they understand what they need to do in order to get those results, I think that's great. And giving them a lot of options to choose from, helping them make it personal. Because for some kids, I mean, honestly, when we do talk about nutrition, they may not have the resources to get the items that, yes, this is, in a perfect world, this is what we would eat, but they probably may or may not have, not everybody has access to that. So what is the best way for them to get in certain things, and helping them understand, okay, yes, and this is what we would like for you to do for cardio, or this is in order, to make sure that you're working on your heart, making sure that you're healthy. What are some options? What are some things you would like to do? Here are some things you can try, and then now you get to pick. And I think giving them that choice and helping them make it personal and making it relevant to them is what is so important. And, understanding that sometimes I got to get outside of my box too and understand what my students can and cannot do. is huge, you know, based off of their resources and what's available to them.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to read, I thought, an interesting comment. It sounds like we've been focused on implementation rather than the actual standards themselves. If anybody wants to comment or respond, we're going to wrap up in the next minute or so. So if there's any last thoughts. Lots of great conversations. We will be saving the chats to read through. I think Amy, are you coming on to say something?
It's me, Michelle. Amy
Hey.
White. So I think I'm trying to absorb. So today I was in an absorb mode and just listening. And I think Kim said it as the old lady. I think we need to get back to basics. You know, we have a wide range of populations and we need to focus on the kid. It needs to be student-centered in what we want them to do and what they need to be able to do and what's really relevant to our profession. You know, I think sometimes we may be way far out and we just need to bring it back. What do we need for physical education to be where it needs to be? Yeah, I'm still trying to listen and absorb in my 22nd year, listening to these conversations, you know, as we moved forward. But we've got to focus on our populations of students and that it's not going to be all the same. I think Sarah made the comment about swimming. You know, that worked for some, not for others. What do we really need to have in this as a standard for the majority of the population we're serving?
Thank you, Amy. So it's 7:26. I'm going to start getting ready to close. Please continue to share any thoughts in the chat. We are going to save the chat. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts and taking the time. This has been recorded, so there will be a recording later available for you for definitely, you know, some people like that time to chew, I saw through the chat, or digest or think about it. And so we appreciate you joining us this evening to share your thoughts. So just as another aside, Shape America will be conducting a brief survey to capture the feedback from this, to be able to share more feedback from you all. I will say it's been good to hear, because there's been similar conversations within the task force. So I think it's been great to hear from a broader range of people from various areas across the nation. We will also be looking, we're going to turn this around very quickly, to survey students, and we'll be sharing out how we would like to capture student voice as well. We've heard a lot about that. This is about the children, right? So how do we make it meaningful for students? So we will be asking some teachers, if they can, to share, to capture feedback from their students, but we'll provide more details about that later. But just to be thinking about that as you're moving forward and be on the lookout for that. And as I mentioned earlier, we are starting the same process for our national health education standards, and we will be hosting another town hall specifically to the health education standards. So looking out for more information around that, and we hope to see you there as well. And we'll be having an email with information to register. Again, thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists for joining us and sharing your thoughts and being brave to share your thoughts first and with everyone. My email address will be is mcarter, my first name, my first initial, last name @shapeamerica.org. If you want to share any other thoughts, any feedback on today, we really want, as Sarah said, we want to hear from you, because we want to get this right, and we really want to serve students, all students in the United States. And so we have an opportunity to change things with this revision and with the revision of our national health education standards. So with that being said, I'm going to give you 1 minute back to your evening. It's 7:29 Eastern, and thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.